Ginny Millers had always been the kind of person who lived quietly, unnoticed by most, except by those who frequented the small diner where she worked. At 29, she had come to accept that life would be a routine of early mornings and late nights, where time felt as if it were passing through her hands without leaving any real mark. Every day, she'd rise before dawn, shuffle 3 blocks through the quiet, fog-filled streets of rural Kansas, and slip into her faded blue apron at Rosie's Diner. There was no drama in her life, no wild adventures or heartbreaks, just the simple, predictable rhythm of her job and the occasional exchange of pleasantries with the regulars. She lived alone above a small pharmacy, and though the apartment was modest, it had all she needed. The walls were lined with photographs, most of which had faded over the years. Her father had passed when she was just 15, and her mother followed 2 years later. The aunt who had taken her in had moved to Arizona years ago to deal with her arthritis, leaving Ginny with little more than occasional letters and a handful of phone calls on holidays. Ginny often told herself she was fine after all. She'd gotten used to being alone. But there was something about the way her father's old photos sat in their frames, neglected and yellowing, that reminded her of just how long it had been since she'd felt truly cared for. It was early October when she first noticed him. The boy couldn't have been more than 10 small for his age, with a quiet intensity in his eyes that seemed to take everything in but gave away nothing. He always sat in the same corner booth, farthest from the door, a backpack much too big for his frame resting beside him and a book spread open in front of him. The first day he came in, he ordered nothing but a glass of water, and Ginny had brought it with a smile and a paper straw. He thanked her with a small, almost imperceptible nod, and that was it. The second day, he ordered the same thing. And the third. By the time the second week rolled around, Ginny had noticed his routine. Every morning at precisely 7:15, before school, he'd walk in and sit down, sipping his water slowly while watching the others grown adults ordering stacks of pancakes, eggs, bacon, and toast before leaving at 7:55 without ever taking a bite. She didn't know why, but something about the boy struck her, the loneliness in his eyes mirroring the quiet ache that had lived in her own heart for so many years. On the 15th day, Ginny made a mistake. The kitchen had prepared an extra plate of pancakes, and without thinking, she set it down in front of the boy, along with his usual glass of water. "Oh, I'm sorry," she said, immediately confused. "The kitchen made an extra. I'll just leave it here instead of throwing it away." The boy looked up at her, and for a moment, his eyes held a battle between suspicion and hunger. His gaze flicked from the plate back to his book, before he finally reached for the fork. She couldn't tell if he was grateful or just too proud to reject the food. Either way, he ate every bite. Not a word of thanks, just a silent acknowledgement that made something in Ginny's chest tighten. It became their silent ritual after that. Ginny would bring him the extra batch of pancakes or the mistaken order the cook had gotten wrong. One day it was scrambled eggs with toast, the next oatmeal with brown sugar. Every morning, the boy never asked for anything. He never spoke unless it was to say thank you. And yet, Ginny couldn't help but notice that his shoulders slowly began to relax, that he would meet her gaze a second longer each time she set the plate in front of him. One morning, Harold, a retired postal worker who sat in the same seat every day, noticed her bringing him the food. "Who's that kid you keep serving?" Harold asked, his voice low but curious. Ginny glanced at the boy, then at Harold. "Never seen his parents," she said quietly. "Don't know, but he's hungry." Kathy, who worked the grill, was less accepting of the arrangement. After the third week, she cornered Ginny in the back. "You're feeding a stray," she said, not unkindly, but with a tone that was more pragmatic than sympathetic. "You give handouts, they never learn gratitude. He'll just disappear one day. They always do." Ginny had heard it all before. It wasn't the first time someone had criticized her for helping a stranger, but there was something in Kathy's voice that made Ginny's chest tighten. "It's fine," she said with a shrug, as she wiped her hands on her apron. "I used to be that hungry too." It was the most personal thing she'd shared with Kathy, or anyone, in the 3 years she'd worked there. The boy never gave his name, and Ginny never asked. There was something about the way he entered the diner each morning, how he positioned himself so that he could see both the door and the window, that told her not to ask. Questions would make him leave, and Ginny wasn't ready to risk that. Instead, she kept the water glass full, made sure the pancakes were warm, and did what she could to make the diner feel like a place where he could breathe a little easier, at least for 40 minutes every day. As the weeks went by, Ginny couldn't help but wonder, was he living nearby? Did he have family? Why was he always alone? But she pushed those questions away, reminding herself that kindness, without conditions, was still kindness. And if this was all she could offer, it would have to be enough. The boy's shoulders began to straighten, and slowly, his gaze would meet hers. Sometimes, the small moments of eye contact felt like they spoke volumes, as if their unspoken arrangement was enough to break through the walls they'd both spent years building. But not everyone was so understanding. By the 6th week, the diner regulars had started to talk. They didn't say much, but their looks spoke volumes. One businessman, his voice dripping with condescension, remarked, "Kids these days expect handouts everywhere. Times must be changing." Ginny let the words slide off her like water from a window. She'd learned long ago that defending kindness was often a battle with hardened hearts. Mark, the diner's manager, however, was harder to ignore. One morning, he called Ginny into the back office. His face was set, and his fingers tapped nervously against the laminate desk. "I've been watching you with that kid," he said, his tone businesslike. "Can't have employees giving away free meals. It's bad for business and sets a precedent." Ginny twisted the apron in her hands. She wasn't expecting a lecture, but here it came. "I understand," she said quietly. "I'll cover the cost myself." Mark raised an eyebrow. "From your tips?" "They barely cover my rent," Ginny replied. "But it's my choice." Mark sighed after a long pause. "Fine," he said reluctantly. "But if it affects your work, or if that kid causes any trouble, it stops immediately." Ginny nodded, the relief washing over her. She hadn't expected this compromise, but she could live with it. For the next few weeks, she set aside a portion of her tips, money that might have gone toward a new coat or a long-overdue dentist appointment, and paid for the boy's breakfast each morning. But one Thursday in November, the boy didn't show. Ginny felt a knot form in her stomach, an uneasy feeling that wouldn't let go. She checked the door every few minutes, but he never walked in. She prepared his usual plate of pancakes anyway, setting it at his booth, just in case. Kathy, as usual, passed by with her criticism. "Waste of food," she muttered. By closing time, the plate was still untouched, a silent reminder of the boy's absence. The next day, and the next, no sign of him. A week went by, and Ginny found herself wondering if Kathy had been right that the boy had moved on, just like every other stray had before him. The thought left her hollow, though she couldn't explain why. On the 10th day of his absence, Kathy couldn't resist. "Told you," she said, her voice not unkind but sure of itself. "They never stick around once the free ride ends." Ginny didn't respond. She didn't know what had happened to the boy, but a part of her still held on to the hope that he'd come back. And then, one morning, something unexpected happened. 4 black SUVs with government plates rolled into the diner's parking lot. The quiet that fell over the usual bustle of the diner was almost unnatural. The men who got out wore dark suits and sharp expressions. Ginny felt her heart pound in her chest, an instinctive fear that something was wrong. But then, one of the men stepped forward. His uniform was military, and his bearing commanded attention. "Are you Ginny Millers?" he asked, his voice low but firm. Ginny's breath caught in her throat. She nodded. "I'm Colonel David Reeves," he said. "I'm here because of a promise made by one of my men." The name, Adam, was all it took for the pieces to fall into place. The boy, the one she'd been feeding all these weeks, was the son of a soldier, a master sergeant who had fallen in Afghanistan. Colonel Reeves handed her an envelope from the commanding general and a handwritten letter from Adam's father. "I'm here to thank you," Colonel Reeves said, his voice thick with emotion. "For feeding Adam, for giving him dignity when he needed it most." Ginny's hands shook as she took the letter, tears clouding her vision. The simple kindness she had shown, a plate of pancakes every morning, had meant more than she could ever imagine to a boy who had lost everything. And then, in that quiet diner, as the colonel and his men saluted her, Ginny realized that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness could have the largest impact. Her simple gestures had not just fed a hungry child. They had preserved the memory of a fallen soldier. The next week, Rosie's Diner became a place of reverence, a place where the story of Adam and his father spread through the town. And it wasn't just the regulars who came to honor Ginny. Military personnel made detours to visit. leaving tokens of appreciation, and soon, the booth where Adam used to sit became a place of quiet dignity for those who served in uniform. Ginny had never sought recognition. She had never expected anything in return. But as she stood there, amidst the soldiers, the thank yous, and the newfound respect, she realized something. Sometimes, the greatest kindness is offered not for reward, but because it's the right thing to do. And as she hung up her apron that evening, a challenge coin sat quietly in her pocket, a reminder that sometimes, even the smallest gestures can change a life. So what do you think? Do small acts of kindness truly change the world, or are they simply fleeting moments? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Let's discuss.